us. We're very excited to be able to finally talk about this project and present it to you. The Website for All, the Inclusive Web Project. So I am one of the co-organizers of the Aliham Meetup group, but also one of the team members that was involved in this project. And I will kind of be leading you through today's discussions. So first, let's have a look at the agenda. So there will be a brief introduction. We're going to look at the demographic research. We're going to introduce you to Silvertone Hills, look at the persona development and design. Next, we're going to look at some of the module content that has been developed for this project, the media, teacher resources, and then we're going to kind of finish it off with a co-design and testing that has gone on to complete this project. So welcome again. And I think the next person to present is, oh no, it's still me, I apologize, team members. So there were 7 of us that participated to make this happen. Myself, Jenna Campbell, we have Devin Crouchak. You're also going to be hearing from Sandy Gowder, then Jennifer Curry-Yankee and Ryan Yoslin, Ian Oshie. And unfortunately, the last member, Colin Taylor, was not able to join us today, so you won't be hearing from him, but certainly we will be discussing the content. One thing to let you know is that another interesting aspect of this project was that it actually happened all in the virtual environment. Like many of us are working from home, having to use virtual platforms to conduct our business and sometimes even social interactions. We also had to collaborate this way. So we had actually used Zoom and Microsoft Teams to help us with the meetings and sharing of content and work together to put all of this together. And I think it's your turn, Jen.
Thank you, it is. So our target audience for this project is high school students. Our concept is to plant the seeds of accessibility and inclusion as early as possible. The project looks at some basic concepts in a way we think will be interesting for this population. The students explore the accessibility through the eyes of end users, exploring an indie rock band's website. Our hope is to engage these high school students who are just beginning to learn how to create content and get them asking the questions, 1, is this accessible? And 2, can everyone access this? Just as they are beginning to develop web content. We believe this will encourage them to learn more about accessibility so that all people can access their content and will overall reduce the need for remediation later on. So on the screen, I have a persona here, one of the personas that we've used in our modules, and this is Mark, he's a bartender. Our goal is to build these concepts of accessibility and usability in right from the very beginning. And by introducing these new concepts in tandem with web development, we strive to reduce the need for remediation later on. This project was made possible with funding from the Canadian Internet Registration Authority's CIRA Community Investment Program. CIRA strives to fund innovative community internet projects to build a resilient, trusted, and secure internet for all Canadians. This project is also a collaboration between Mohawk College's IdeaWorks, our Accessibility Research Lab, the Accessible Media Production Graduate Certificate Program, and CMS Web Solutions. All members presenting today are graduates of the AMP program or faculty members. And over to Ryan.
Thank you, Jen. So the first action the project took was to conduct research to figure out when and if students were learning concepts of accessible web design. I was tasked with conducting research as well as interviewing educators from across Canada to provide the team with this information. In order to get an idea of the type of knowledge Canadian secondary school students had of accessible web design, I interviewed several educators at different grade levels. From this, it seemed as though the target grade level for our modules were students in grades 9 or 10. Often this is when students are first learning about web design, so the purpose of the modules would be the most effective at this early stage. In addition, I also looked at whether students have reliable home internet access from across the country. According to Statistics Canada, it appears that the majority of students have access to the internet. However, almost a quarter of students living in the lowest income bracket had only access to a mobile phone. This was something our team made note of when designing the modules. Research was also done to make sure that the modules were developed so students easily process the information. This included creating content that was easy to navigate and simple to understand, as well as including different forms of multimedia to keep students engaged. In addition to interviewing educators, further research was done on finding out what kind of web design curriculum was offered across Canada. Depending on the province, curriculum on web design and accessibility varied. From this, our modules sought to teach the most basic web accessibility knowledge. This would allow students from any part of Canada to be able to understand the content. Due to the effect of COVID-19, as well as the future of remote learning, research was also done to enable students from all backgrounds to learn the content. On top of this, interviews with the educators with ties to remote northern communities showcase the need to create modules that can be accessed by those with low bandwidth internet connections. Lastly, although educators had advocated for the use of video in order to keep students engaged, we had to keep in mind that videos should be kept under 3 minutes each. This would allow those in remote communities or those with low bandwidth internet connections to still have access. Educators also showcase the need for the modules to be delivered in offline format, such as using a USB drive. Our project had the opportunity to work with a local Hamilton band by the name of Silvertown Hills. They were gracious enough to allow us to create multiple inaccessible websites based off their image, which tied into our modules. Currently, we have completed 2 separate inaccessible Silvertown Hills websites. Each version ties in with the theme of a module and will allow students to get an idea of the barriers people with disabilities face. For example, the version 1 site ties in with module 1. This module gives an overall introduction to web accessibility and some potential visitors to the band's website. Next, the version 2 site ties in with the vision and hearing module, which showcases the barriers individuals with vision or hearing disabilities have when accessing the web. Next, we'll move on to Janet, who will discuss persona development and design.
Thank you, Ryan. So as Ryan was explaining, we have different versions of the website. And what do web designers and developers do when they are developing websites? Sometimes they use personas. And personas are supposed to represent potential website users that would have various diverse characteristics, skills, needs, goals, and access information in different ways. And that is what we have used throughout these modules to help students explore how different people would interact with the content. Sorry, can you switch the slide, Jen? Thank you, thank you. So personas, of course, are fictional representation of what we would consider actual users for the site. So there are various things that have to be considered for those users, such as the demographics, what are their goals, and what tasks are they going to be looking to complete on the various sites? What is their technical experience and background? And of course, what are their frustrations and wishes? All of these things are things that we wanted to make sure to capture in the personas so that the students can then use those personas as examples of how different people will interact with our websites. So the personas offer us a face for the user story. And what we hope with the use of these personas is that it will also help to build empathy and understanding of the user experience and all of the frustrations that can come along with the trying to access inaccessible content. And of course, it provided the framework for the content modules. And I will now turn it over to Ayan to discuss the design of these personas.
Thanks, Jeanette. Yeah, so the design of the personas, while we're working on it, we realized that there is sort of mixed research on whether users have more empathy with photography versus illustrations. But for this project, we decided to go with illustrations because we found that photos represent a single person while drawings can represent many. And a persona really represents what a person does, their behaviors, versus really what they physically look like. And as well, the personas were hand-drawn, then manipulated in Illustrator, and that allowed us to have a bit more control over what they visually look like in line with our brand. So in terms of future ideas for where we want to take those personas, we would be developing perhaps comic panels or putting them into situ, so we would see a bit more of their behavior. So yeah, next we do talk about module content. We'll talk a little bit about accessibility challenges as well as the design of the site, but I'll start with branding. So when we were doing our brand as a group, we asked questions about values and attributes, how we see ourselves, representation, as well as the different color combinations. And some of the key considerations that we had to look at was icons that were legible in black and white. And we do that because, if a teacher is printing out a handout or a module page on a black and white printer or grayscale printer, it's nice to be able to make sure though that icon is legible across. As well as making sure that the logo, could be adapted for bilingual use. Because in French, typically it's a lot longer. And in terms of the color combinations, we look at the contrast, and the yellow and blue and the white and blue have a strong enough contrast of 9:1 and 12:1, respectively. As well, looking at the logo now, I think we did a good job of creating a logo that conveyed approachability, seriousness, professional, and a little bit of neutrality. On a side note, I think hot pink was vetoed as a color choice in our project. And then next we talk about the wireframes. So just to support the development team, we built a wireframe, which really is just like a visual blueprint. It doesn't contain any design really elements or formatting or style, just to show like the layout of a web page. And it helps us plan out the structure. And it was really helpful in meetings as well, considering that we all worked virtually. To quickly get feedback before we jumped right into production. And ultimately, we were looking at getting a clean layout. So something with a consistent footer, straightforward menu, and that really focused on 2 pathways, one for the student and one for the teacher. So next, I'm going to pass it to Sandy to talk about the actual development.
Thank you, Ayan. So the site development, first thing that we wanted to be sure about was an accessible theme. We opted to build the site on WordPress, and doing that allowed us to control the design and the accessibility of the theme. We went for a simple design and layout to make it easy for students to focus on the content. The modules themselves required a learning management system, or an LMS, plugin for the course content. We wanted to have a system that could support things like student registration, progress tracking, and simple knowledge checks. However, none of the third-party plugins that we tried met our accessibility requirements out of the box. We had to settle on something, so we settled on the most robust plugin, and that one was LearnDash. As well as the theme and the content, we needed to choose interactive learning elements. We wanted to make sure that these modules were interactive and keep students engaged. So to do that, we decided to include a variety of learning elements. We chose to include audio and video recordings with transcripts, mini quizzes, and rich HTML5 elements that were produced using something called H5P. So when we looked at the usability and accessibility, we recognized fairly early on that we needed to simplify the structure. By default, the LMS created a multi-level course structure that proved challenging for most of our testers. So we decided to rework the content to flatten the structure and make the flow much more linear. As I mentioned, these LMS plugins out of the box are not accessible, so we had to make some customizations as much as possible to improve the accessibility. It was relatively easy to adjust colors to meet contrast requirements and to suit our branding. And we were able to modify some of the HTML structure to improve logical order and flow, but we still weren't able to deliver a fully accessible site. We did, however, connect with the plugin developer, and we're pleased to hear that they are aware of the accessibility issues of their plugin and are in the process of addressing them. So that is a huge win as far as we're concerned. However, not all the components are what they say they are. One of our goals with this project was to deliver an accessible website, and that meant that any components we included in the site needed to be accessible. Many of the lessons included rich HTML5 elements developed by H5P. And unfortunately, not all of those components are accessible, so we only chose the ones that were. However, during testing, again, we discovered that some of those elements actually weren't accessible for all users. So for the next phase of the project, we'll be looking for ways to update those elements with accessible ones. Now over to you, Devin.
There we go. Thank you, Sandy. I always forget to unmute myself. So my role here in this project was all media requirements. And I feel very confident in saying that every challenge that arose was because of the pandemic, unfortunately. But what do you do? I chose to look at this as an opportunity to face a unique challenge and explore alternatives. So there were 6 videos that I created for this project. There's a Silvertone Hills story, the Silvertone Hills introduction, and a task video for each of the personas. You'll see the Powtoons are listed here, but this is primarily captioning. And just to clarify, all of the videos we produced were then captioned, and many of them were produced from scratch. I really worked hard to include integrated described video. So to start off with the band's video, I was thrilled to work with them to produce a video that they were excited to share with their audience. Because of the pandemic restrictions, I couldn't film the band's interview. So one of our solutions to this was meeting over Zoom, discussing best practices for filming, like lighting and audio recording. Unfortunately, we still face a variety of challenges, but we just got creative, and I'm very pleased with our final product. So if I can jump to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the persona videos. So like I said, there was a task that each of our personas had to accomplish with this website. Nearing the end of the project, it was decided that we need to burn in the captions. And this is one thing about these videos in particular that I would have liked to change, just to make them a little more appealing, and the video as a whole, I would have edited differently just to make it a little more nice to look at, if you will. And the persona videos, so these also produce their own unique challenges. These videos are where I would normally have recorded a live person's voice, but it quickly became clear that this was not an option, so we turned to synthetic voices. I found a website that had a variety of voices, and I found really great alternatives for each individual persona, and this is what I went with. So from there, much of my time was spent playing with the different voices, deciding which voice I thought best matched each individual persona, and then writing scripts to keep these videos as short as possible and to include their integrated described video in the scripts. The persona videos were then screen recorded on a variety of different devices. Jeanette was a huge help here with Lori's video, and she is much better with voiceover than I ever will be. And I then went into editing to trim the persona experiences down to what I aim to be a minute long, a little bit over than that for most of them. But I have to say, my favorite one was Mary's experience. I became very invested in Mary's persona. I ended up having to create a Facebook account for Mary. Some of you may have seen her post on LinkedIn, I believe. Like, I truly became this retired widowed grandmother of 5 when I was creating this account. Now, convincing friends of mine in real life to be friends with a fictional old lady, an entirely different story. But it's fine. They became invested. It was great. We all had a good time. So with Mary being my favorite persona, I'd love to share her video to show how the synthetic voice is like, maybe show some of the challenges with the script, certain words being pronounced differently than you might expect, and just show her experience with the website. Whenever you're ready, Jen.
Hello there. You joined me just in time to check out the Silvertone Hills website. I'm checking out their site because I love spoiling my grandkids, and Silvertone Hills is my grandson's favorite band. I am hoping I can buy one of their sweaters for him. Because of my arthritis in my wrists, I'm using my tablet since I find it much easier to navigate websites than on a computer. I know my glaucoma could still make this task difficult, but I will do my best. This site is a little difficult to see, and this pop-up is very inconvenient, but at least I can zoom in and can close it. Now to the store. I'm having trouble reading what's on the page. There's a notification that the form's already timed out. Thankfully, I can close the notification. Maybe it will let me continue. Let's try selecting a sweater. One sweater for $30. A CAPTCHA? This is very frustrating. I always struggle with these. Hopefully, I'll be able to get past it to finish my purchase. It was a challenge, but I made it past the CAPTCHA. I can't seem to complete my purchase. For some reason, the button doesn't work. This is very disappointing. I won't be able to spoil my grandson after all.
So this is Mary's experience. Mary has glaucoma, so you probably saw that it was difficult to see some of the screen on her tablet. And although she doesn't use Facebook in this scenario, I'm excited to see what her social media actions take moving forward. And this video is very similar to the other personas. We presented it on different platforms and tried to represent their experience specifically. Just to conclude, really, this is a great experience, and I look forward to seeing where it goes in the future. So I will pass it back to Jeanette to talk about the teacher resources.
Thanks, Devin. Yeah, so we also wanted to make sure that we provide some supports and resources for the teachers to help them and in guiding the students through these modules as well. So some of the support materials is used to extend learning about various aspects, such as, for example, web usability and accessibility, looking at some disability awareness and statistics. What about the internet? How do people generally access and use the internet? Look at, of course, how to test for web accessibility, as well as other things. So the resources were to support the teachers so that they can use these resources to support the content or extend the content of the modules. Provide them with activities to engage the students. Some of the activities were things like simulations, for example, online simulations, so the students can interact with content in different ways and get that experience of what it might be like when you face certain limitations and so on. And then to expand the concepts of any of the proposed activities as well. So the types of resources that we tried to find were resources that were readily available in English and in French. And if we could not find it in both languages, then we tried to make sure that an equivalent is found to help support both the English and French speaking students and teachers. So the hands-on, as I mentioned, the hands-on activities were things like simulations. So for example, I found some online activities that allow students to explore the readability of different fonts, where they can actually change the font type, the font sizes, and then they can actually test for themselves, like, okay, how is my readability impacted? How fast can I read this particular paragraph in this font versus another font? Just so that they can start to experience what other people or how other people may view content and the impacts that it could have on them. For example, if the font that is chosen on different sites is inaccessible. And so I think now I am going to pass it over to, who am I passing it over to? I'm so sorry, my computer died. I think it's Ryan.
Yeah,
sorry, Ryan,
next.
it's you to talk about the co-design testing and the Q&A.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so during the later stages of development, our team had the opportunity to do end user testing with people with disabilities. We were lucky enough to have several individuals with various disabilities use their assistive technology, and test both the modules and the Silvertone Hills websites. During these sessions, we gave them tasks to get an idea of whether there were any accessibility or usability issues that we may have overlooked when developing the websites or the module. While doing these tasks, our end user testers gave feedback on the barriers they faced. The majority of these revolved around navigational issues for screen reader users. Thankfully, their responses helped us create modules in which navigation felt as accessible as possible. In addition, they were also able to assist our team in letting us know how they felt content should be presented. Overall, the benefit of doing end user testing helped our team improve content presentation, as well as fixed several navigational issues which we overlooked. Next, I'm going to move it on to Jennifer, who will talk about further QA that we did, as well as hopefully we can do some Q&A after.
Thank you, Ryan. The project team practiced co-design throughout the project. In addition to our team members, we worked with members of the disability community who use assistive technology to access web content, high school students to provide feedback on design and engagement, and quality assurance testing in both English and French. As a final wrap up, we just wanted to say a huge thank you to those team members that weren't part of the main team. Our testers, Martin, Matthew, Tiana, Aaron, Trisha, Tamisha, Jordan, Carla, Sharon, Jean-Luca, and Talem. To our French translator, Helene, our quality assurance, our team, and Julia, and then our IdeaWorks administrative team, Gregor, Andrea, and Michael. At this point in time, we would like to share the module with you and give you an opportunity to ask any questions. So I am going to, while you're formulating your questions, I'm going to share the what the modules look like.
And sorry, I was just going to say, in case you're interested in checking out the modules, you can go to websitesforall.ca, and that's all one word, websitesforall.ca.
So this is our home module. So this is where you would land in it, and then you would start log in to start learning if you're a student, or access the teaching resources if you're a teacher. When you log in, you're given the option of signing up. You will register for your account. I'm already logged in through an email and password. The modules themselves are located on the module page, and we have completed 3 modules: the Introduction to Web Accessibility, Vision and Hearing, and Web Accessibility Tips and Tools to help support individuals with hearing or vision loss. In the future, we hope to complete the modules on physical mobility and dexterity and processing. When you're in the module, the first one, you're introduced to Silvertone Hills. And Andrew is here, one of the band members of Silvertone Hills, if you have any questions for him and his involvement in the project. But here you would go through an introduction to meet the band. You would look at their websites. So we launched 2 different websites for Silvertone Hills, as Ryan mentioned. And then they get into a little bit of the legislation around the Accessible Canada Act, and then they meet our end users. So as Devin pointed out, Mary is definitely her favorite. And here you can listen to Mary introduce herself. It's a very linear format, as Sandy mentioned, and you go through the different module pages to meet each of the end users. And then the students, we ask about them, and we ask about their involvement in content development. So here they are given a little bit of a quiz to see how they access content and to get them thinking about the different ways that people might engage with the web. So whether that be through a computer, a tablet, or their smartphone, whether they're using assistive technology, and how they're accessing the content. And then they're given the tasks to visit the band's website. So I'm just going to click over to that. So this is the first inaccessible website for the band. and we ask them different questions about how they engage with the site and if they notice any challenges with it. They're then asked for their feedback on the accessibility of the site and given a knowledge check. Once there, they're then directed to move on to the vision and hearing module. Okay. I think I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.